So the question was presented, and I'm reading off. I have my computer screen over here, and I have lots of notes. And so if you see me going this way, I'm just reading some of the stuff I wrote down. So I stay on topic. The texts of the Greek intellectuals like Plato, Homer, Aristotle, Epicurus are classified as philosophy books, but I consider them pagan religious books. Would you also consider such rich sources of pagan theology religious books too? And do you incorporate any of their content into your beliefs? Yes and no. Okay, so there's lots of yeses and nos here in my answer. Let's start with, can the writings of the philosophers be considered pagan religious books? Can the writings of the philosophers be considered to be pagan religious books? Are they pagan scripture? Okay. Religious books or scripture within any pagan system is very hard to talk about, because pagans, Greeks included, and we're specifically with the Greeks, they didn't have a canon of scripture. They did not have a Bible, Torah, Quran. There was no book that the Greeks looked at and said, or a piece of writing that said, this is the word of the gods. They didn't have that. The closest thing that the Greeks had to an authority on religion was the Oracle of Delphi. The Pythia was the closest thing the Greeks had to an authority, that when she spoke, when she said something, it was like, okay, we have to listen to this. This is important. That was the closest thing you had to an authority figure on religious matters, was the Pythia. While there was no scripture or canon of scripture that the Greeks had, they did have a collection of writings that were authoritative, in the sense that they told them things about the gods. You have, for example, Hesiod, his writings, Works and Days and Theogony. Those were important for understanding the gods. You also have the writings of Homer. Homer wrote the epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's a story, but in the story you have interactions with the gods, and this gives you a look into the belief system and the views that they had at the time about the gods and their relationship and what they understood the gods to be. So Homer informs us of those things, and you also have the Orphic hymns, the hymns to the gods, and in those hymns you learn a lot about the gods, their associations, their tales, their stories. For example, the story of Demeter and Persephone, we find a lot about that story in the hymns. These writings that I mentioned are just examples. They inform us of the attitudes and beliefs about the gods, the afterlife, and myths, practices, worship, and so forth. These would be religious texts, in the sense that when it talks about religion, the things that religion talks about, those works deal more with that topic. The writings of the philosophers, however, are a little bit different. They deal with epistemology, metaphysics, ethics. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. It is the search for wisdom. And what Greek philosophy did that no one else did up until that time, was what the philosophers tried to do, they're attempted to do, was replace opinions on the ultimate matters of concern with knowledge. So before the philosophers of Greece, there was just opinions, myths, and just general beliefs, like, oh, it's raining, it's a god making it rain. That was up until really the Greeks, that was the worldview. Then the philosophers came around and they sat down. They had a lot of leisure time, these philosophers. They had a lot of leisure. These philosophers really, they didn't have a 9-to-5 job. They weren't going to the office and then coming home at 6 o'clock at night and then saying, let me contemplate ultimate reality. No, these people, they didn't work. Athenian society had slaves, so if you have a slave population doing all the hard work, you then create a class of people who have lots of leisure time. So philosophy naturally arose out of that. And so these Greeks were sitting around and thinking, and what they tried to do was understand the world through natural means of reason and knowledge and just searching for the truth of nature, trying to come to a natural conclusion to things instead of a supernatural explanation. So this is, for me, the main distinguishing point between philosophy and theology, or religious works. Religious works deal with God, explains the motivation of God, the reasoning of God, everything about God. That's what theology deals about. Philosophy deals with reason and explaining things using your mind, working through things logically and with reason. You're not always going to come to a reasonable conclusion using your mind. You can make illogical you can give illogical explanations to things, but it is the attempt to step away from myth and gods into reason and knowledge and truth. That's the main difference. Plato's writings. Okay, so Plato's a little bit different. There is a lot of spirituality inside Plato, and then later the Neoplatonists like Plotinus and I think Porphyry. I think Porphyry was a Neoplatonist. Those people, they took Plato's work and really made it. They created religion out of Plato's work. They took Plato's spirituality and really took it to the next level. And Plato dealt with topics on God, the first principle, the soul, and things of that nature. And then the Neoplatonists took it and really developed it further. And that's where Neoplatonism is really like the real spiritual meat to Greek philosophy. And I love Neoplatonism. I think it's great. And if you then study theology, Christian theology, you'll see a lot of the Platonic ideas going into Christian thought, along with Aristotle. I'll say very quickly that the Christian theologians, they worked with the Greek philosophies, or the philosophers, the work of the philosophers, and used that as their backbone for their theology, because these theologians were trained in philosophy. A lot of the early church fathers they studied philosophy next to pagans, so they would all go to school together, Christians and pagans together, and they would learn their philosophy. And then later these theologians would then refute pagans and make their own writings, and even later in history with like Augustine and people like him, they still used the works of the philosophers as their material to work with. To the theologian, philosophy was the handmaiden to theology, and was there to kind of serve as a means to prove God's existence, or things like that. So would I consider the writings of the philosophers to be pagan theology or theological works? No, it's two different things. Theology deals with God, the nature of God. Philosophy deals with reason, searching for knowledge, and relying on your mental capacity to really think things through and providing natural explanation for things. Now here's the thing though, the works of the philosophers, they are pagan. These were pagan people who wrote these things, so these writings really do inform me and instruct me and give me a lot of material to work with when, contemplating my worldview as a pagan. If I were to create a pagan canon of scripture, so let's say I want to sit down and make a pagan Bible, it would include things like Hesiod, the Orphic hymns. It would include things of Plato, Pythagoras, things of the philosophers as well, because they do, from our point of view now, when we look back at their work, it seems very spiritual, very abstract or different. When they talk about the elements, when the pre-Socratics talk about what is the earth made out of, and they would say, oh, it's made out of water, it's made out of fire, it's made out of this, they talked about the four elements. We think of that as very magical or mystical now, but because we have modern science, but back then this was their science. Those were the elements. These were, that wasn't really a spiritual idea that the world was made out of water. To them, that was science. So perspective really helps you understand this. But I would include their works too in a canon of pagan scripture, because I think it's informative to some level of degree when you work within their worldview of things. This is why when I consider myself pagan, in what sense do I consider myself pagan? I consider myself pagan in the philosophical sense more so than anything, because I look to the works of the philosophers as a means or as a way to guide me how to live, how to deal with life, to understand ethics, virtue, what is wrong, what is right, morality, things about that, and all about that. So I love to read about the philosophers because they really do give you a good place to work with when dealing with things of that nature. So while they are not, in my view, pagan religious works, they are very important pagan intellectual works that really give you a lot to think about and really can help you construct and build your own pagan worldview. So those are my thoughts and opinions on the matter. I hope you enjoyed. And a personal update and note, I want to show you, if you've seen this over here while I was talking, my book, Tarot Unlocking the Arcana, is going to be released very soon. It's available on pre-order on Amazon, and it's going to be released in the next maybe 6 weeks or so. The time, I don't know too much about when it's actually going to be released, but it's going to be in the near future. The book is out. It's coming out. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. This is my book that I've been writing for many years, and I'm so excited and proud to present this to you all. This is it. It's 240 pages of tarot goodness. Come on, people. So if you've seen my channel, if you've not seen my channel, go into the description box below, subscribe to my channel, order the book, and I will see you guys next time when I am back on the Pagan Perspective. Take care.